before I get going on this, because it's supposed to be about lessons learned, and I've been doing ERDF projects for since 2008, 2009, 2 different projects, similar but different. Has everybody here got experience with an ERDF project? So that's most. You haven't. You have. Yes? No? Yes? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah. He's going to say yes, whatever. So, yeah, so to a certain extent, I don't think the lessons that I've learned over that 6 years is going to be substantially different to anything anyone who's had to run one of these things will have found themselves. So all I can give is kind of where the problems that I had working for a large organisation trying to deliver this, and certainly working for the University of Leicester in particular, had great pluses. It's a big organisation. It can support you in a way something smaller can't, particularly if you start running into irregularities. And in other ways, it already knows what it does. It knows how it does it. It has its processes. This doesn't allow you to do that. You have to do it their way. And you've got this constant pull all the time, which has created some really major problems. Now, will this actually go? No, well, this is the brief summary. This is supposed to be about the SME innovation type agenda, but all of these projects, if they're in PA1, all move across the same sorts of things. So I'm going to try and tailor it a little bit. And if I'm saying something that you all know, just sort of wave your hands and say, you know this, you know this. So we're going to briefly go through the problems that University of Leicester really had, what we've learned from it, how we do our interaction, which probably doesn't change much across anybody. How you do it is pretty standard. Managing the project process, which has changed. In 2008, when the first bid went in on the first one, the university had done ERDF before, but it had either been on really small, and by that less than 100,000, or equipment-based projects. So it wasn't about this sort of revenue stream type thing where you're going out and distinctly helping your SMEs. We had quite a lot of problems with risk because of the push-pull with the university, and some of the things that we've learned, that if we go forward in ERDF, we know that's where we would want to start from. Whether we're going to be able to, we'll have to wait and see. I expect you guys all know this already. What's it all about? You've got to fit with the operational priorities. That's going to be the same going forwards. We've already heard that loads of times. What's already been decided about what priorities they want to follow in ERDF and EU SIF, that is what you have to bid into. And we did have a lot of issues with people bidding in, saying, I don't care what that says, I want to do this. You can't actually do that. So going forwards, I was in Berlin in January delivering on something else, and what came out in the new programme is they are going to insist you deliver your outputs. Whereas at the moment, if you don't and you give an excuse and you're not wildly out, you don't get hammered too much. But they were talking about having a fining system, removing money if you don't do every single output you say you're going to do. That's a month ago. They might have changed by now when everyone went, oh my God, what do we do about that? Okay. As we've just been hearing, contributing to cross-cutting themes, doing the equalities, getting on all your forms, whether they're from Mars or not, and all of that kind of thing. And the state aid procurement and publicity, the 3 major ones. If you don't do those, you lose the money, and you can lose huge chunks if you're not careful. The projects I was involved with was the PA1, increasing productivity through innovation, based in the East Midlands area, which, as you know, isn't the whole of the East Midlands, as we also found fairly early on. GSTEP First was also in collaboration with Prospect Leicestershire, East Midlands Development Agency. That disappeared, and then you have this whole business of who officially is your collaborators and so on. IRSA was completely University of, and you should say F on the end of that, IRSA was University of Leicester and ERDF, part funding only, which should have made it simpler, but the premise of it was more complex. So GSTEP, I've been told to talk a little bit about the projects and where we're coming from. This was originally £1.2 million It did get an extension for 1 year. I wrote the extension, so I bid into the second lot of money, and I also wrote the bid for G-Step 2, having run that one. So it went up to 1.8, and then the G-Step 2 chunk on the end made it 2.4 million over 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years altogether, the whole period up to June 2015. So G-Step 1 originally was about satellites. A lovely, wonderful idea. University of Leicester is really good in the space arena. They are excellent at that. And they wanted to use their Earth observation capability along with their satellite capability because they knew businesses were desperate out there to use this expertise. So they got the bid through, looked great. And then they found that SMEs don't really want to do it at that level. What they want is much further downstream. So turning that around to end up being just use of data. Start with data. What data does the company already have? And then think, how can we add value by adding the Earth observation bit to it? So it did get turned around completely, thank goodness, and turned into something else that was more usable that built back up again. IRSA took some lessons from that. You've got the acronyms there, 8 acronyms. And it looked at how can you get this long-term collaborative research going between your business and the university to produce something that both sides want. Because universities are not fantastically brilliant at dealing with really small companies. They don't really have the resources or the direction to do it. They're about producing good postgraduates, good graduates, good research, good academics, and you've got a little bit of downstreaming through what they're producing through their research. So this actual interaction with SMEs, unless it's a spin-out, is quite tricky, it's quite difficult, it's quite small for them. So IRSA was about going for, let's try a longer piece of research, and that was about a 12-month piece. I will rattle through this because this bit about G-Step here. So rattling through G-Step, get the pictures up. So that's the sort of thing G-Step was doing, taking aerial photography, which is great, got a company that does a lot of that, and then looking at all the things you can layer onto something like eventually Google. They've finally agreed that everyone knows Google, let's stick it on Google, that's the easiest way to do it. So we've gone from really quite esoteric stuff all the way through to putting data onto an interface that people understand, and got a lot of good interactions out of that. So the process. Sorry I jumped back, but I realised the slides that came next. So there's your Earth observation. Complex data, great. We still had companies who wanted that. This one was really interesting. This is a heat map of Leicester. And the resolution's not fantastic. But I did a workshop for business doing solar, effectively, to solar companies. And we were looking at some of the heat mapping as well, sort of 2-hour business breakfasts. And I had a number of companies coming in who were selling solar panels, but also interested in the whole heat irradiance of buildings as well. And they looked at that and asked for a sort of slightly bigger version of it on Google, and identified that some of the biggest heat areas here are obviously old housing stock, and also they actually pinpointed down to a few larger factories. Worked out it was air conditioning units. So the amount of heat coming out of those because they were old, that was likely to be the problem. So they actually managed to get some business out of going around all the factories that were old, had old air conditioning, and seeing if they could do something about that. We hadn't anticipated that when we ran that particular workshop. So you never kind of know where the data's going to go. So there's your solar power here. This one was building up, this was actually tree mapping. Would you believe that was something that was useful? Yes, it was. We can map the trees. We can use an algorithm to work out what's a tree and what isn't on aerial photography. So we used an algorithm we would use for something else. And then what that was useful for was they found it was more accurate than local authorities going around counting how many trees they had. So from that you could say to the local authority, here's all the trees in these roads, it's this kind of percentage, this is how much manpower you're going to need to sort of trim them all, because they're all about this big, because they use the 3D imagery to do that. So you're saving them, not manpower, but you're making them direct it a little bit more effectively and getting all the trees done in the year rather than only half of them. So that was quite useful. This one, we got into apps, towards the end of G-Step 1, got into apps. And it was Leicester City who had a map of HGVs and where they wanted them to go. So all that we did with that was we had a graduate in, it's a graduate placement, he sat in the office and he took their static map, got got some information about the sizes of lorries, and then worked out what Leicester wanted for the routes, and just had 3 layers of maps on top of that. I said, if you've got a lorry that's this size, this big, and this axle weight, press this map, this is where Leicester would like you to go when you come into the city. So they made a static map on three levels, which you could download. I think you still download it off the website. Just take it along with you and go, right, okay, I've got a lorry this size. Why can't I go down there? It's a weak bridge, it's too narrow, the bridge is too low. Those kinds of things. Give them that information as to why you want them going a certain way. But it meant you could try and funnel it a little bit. A little bit of work was published off that. This is now a collaboration with a European entity to turn it into a more mobile GIS placement thing straight onto a navigator system. There's some discussion going on with that. So off the back of something quite small for Leicester City and a local company, haulage firm, it moved on to something a lot bigger. So we're never quite sure where the collaboration's going to go. So IRSA came up with, well, in that case, we want to fund things for longer. The IRSA project was about 12 months of research, 2 academics tied in, a postgraduate. It was actually model borrowed from Northwest ERDF, so we knew it was viable, it had been done, it had been tested, we knew it worked. So if you're postgraduate, you have your 2 academics and you find a company who wants 12 months of research done. If the graduate enrolls on a postgraduate qualification, there's real buy-in for them, there's real buy-in for the university. They're going to stick at that piece of work to get that qualification at the end of it, and it's very driven by the company as well about kind of where they want to go with it. So you've got outputs there for ERDF, for the university, for the graduate. So you've got quite a lot of tight buy-in. You've got to be really, really careful on this. It's a postgraduate qualification. There are no teaching modules because ERDF does not support teaching at all. And there is a cost to the company because there is a sort of bench fee cost that ERDF can't pay, and that means that's the bit the company puts in, which, given they get 9 to 10 months of driven research on their project, is not expensive, and it means some quite small companies can actually produce that kind of funding to get that graduate working, and they can look at something really quite blue sky that they would never have done otherwise. So we've got 16 projects running off the back of that. IRSA started in the summer of 2013. These are 12-month projects. We had to get this up and running, hit the ground, really running fast. The last projects end June this year, which is when the project ends. So they finish their sort of qualification 12 months at the same time that this actual project finishes. So to get that going and to get that started and to get those companies on board was quite tough. But there's some really nice work come out of that. We've produced a book of case studies on it called Accelerating Success. It's on the website. The website's at the beginning, but there's a whole load of all of them, including some of the short ones we've done. So it gives you an idea of the sorts of things you can do. You've got to be really aware of the issues with ERDF all the way through. The longer projects, it is really, really easy to get into grief. Got so much stuff going on, which isn't always compliant. So you've got to be really careful how you fund some of it. When I started ERDF, I had my case manager came round and explained it. That's me in the corner going, oh my God. Everyone else is diving for cover, didn't want to know. After 6 years, I'm that one, and I'm as boring as the first person was in the first place about this, because you just go through every little detail on it all the time. I learn very fast. Don't ignore the detail. They will get you on it. I've done originally 3 or 4 audit 13s, a full audit 16 for 3 days where the business manager legged it for the entire time, so I was left doing the whole lot. And I've had the usual ones with IRSA. We're having our second audit on IRSA in 2 years, so almost less than a year and another one. One of the issues coming up was on sort of things to do with procurement, so that's a university issue.
So when you say don't ignore the details, what do you mean?
What I mean about detail, if they say jump 2 inches, you jump 2 inches, not 3, not 1, two, exactly two. Because either one or either side of that is non-compliant. Okay, so it's devil's in the detail. Once you've gone through all these documents enough times, you start to pick up the thread and you can sort of second guess them. And if in doubt, just put it in, get it signed off, get it signed again, get it signed again, and there's no problem with it.
So
Again,
when you talk about procurement issues, without obviously breaching confidentiality, can you give us a sense of the type of procurement issues that you run into, just to give us a flavour?
oh God, yeah. Oh, everything under the sun, I think, would manage. When it started, and this is where there's a bit further on about the contract, with the contract in the first place, the very first one for G-Step 1, lots of things were put in it about what the university would do and how they would do it with SMEs, and it got through. It all got signed off, and we started the project. And then we found the project contract manager came along and said, well, we might have said you can do that, but not in this part of the programme, you can't. So we then started coming up against all these brick walls of things we'd said we'd do in certain ways that you couldn't do. And that was including procurement, where we're using all established procurement methods the university had already done, and I have piles of paperwork of all full procurement that was done by the university, say things like computer contracts, stationery contracts, all those kinds of things. The first round with G-Step, they literally drilled down to the last piece of paperwork to check that everything was compliant, even though it was all done through a full OJU. Yeah? But it's about whether you did it correctly, according to ERDF, which is not the same as the way you do it at the university. So we were really lucky that for some reason they've just dotted every I, and it worked. With the second round, the G-Step 2 and with IRSA, there have been some issues with those structural agreements that the university has done according to all the European rules, because their contract's over 156,000. One of them has not been accepted. So that means everything that was purchased as a preferred supplier isn't eligible. And that is an issue. So I've had to go outside of that and do the whole 3 written quotes, got them in emails, got them written down, got them to agree to things, and even that is now being questioned on the grounds that I didn't specify the number of the items that I wanted. Because at the start, I couldn't tell them the number that I wanted, because all my graduates hadn't come back to say that their particular part of the project wanted one of these. So you had this open agreement, which is too open, with the supplier who's actually giving you a written quote. So it is quite a nightmare process. So you've got to be really, really on the ball here about saying, I'm going to want 5 of those computers and 3 of those screens and 2 of those and 1 of those. And if you need 6, you're stuffed.
Do you know what proportion of projects have clawback applied to them?
I can't give you that figure, no. There's been issues all the way through with every ERDF project that the University of Leicester has run, and the feeling coming back is all of them have had issues. G-Step 1 had a problem with track overheads because they do a generic. This is such a huge organisation. We have a generic percentage that's added on to account for all the background stuff that you can't possibly go around and say, right, I've had 3 pencils from you, and I've had 10 sheets of paper from you, and this from here, and I've used the library 3 times, and I've actually had to call estates out once, and we need someone. So they have a track overhead thing. Unfortunately, it's quite a high percentage, almost doubles your sort of timesheet that you're claiming. And that means we had a year and a quarter with no money at all, while this was fought out by BCLG and track was removed completely. There are no track overheads at all. That means if you know the library has done 3 hours work for you with your 16 graduates, you have to go to the library, find the person who did the work and timesheet them for 3 hours, which they sign, and their person above them signs, and you then put that in their claim. And then your research office goes to payroll, works out how much they're worth per hour for that month, with the add-ons, with their insurance, gives you that figure, that then goes in your claim. IRSA has got about 65 different people who are timesheeted every single month, because they are all working on the project to a certain degree or not. And that means trying to deliver that, trying to go and collect that. It's admin heavy. It's really admin heavy. But if you don't want to get into overheads, and the new programme apparently is going to offer some, be really, really careful with that one, because if you can't prove right the way through to defrail, to that end point, that yes, this is genuinely related to your project, they could just as easily turn around after 2 years and say, sorry, EU's decided that's not an acceptable method of doing it.
They can pay you and then take it back off you.
They'll take it off you. Yes. Because we went for a year and a quarter without any funding at all from them while they thought about it, by the time we got to that point, we had spent so much that it was more than what we owed them. So there wasn't technically a clawback. It just became a deduction of that 1 years claim. And then after that, we had the final claim. And in that period, they changed the procurement rules again. So across that period where they were not allowing us to sort of do anything effectively, but we still had to run a project, they then changed the rules twice. So the close down period of G-Step 1 has an issue with, well, okay, why didn't you change what you were doing with procurement when it changed that? Because you didn't tell us to, because we were still being investigated something else. So you do have to be very on the ball on the changes. They don't necessarily tell you to change them. You have to keep going on the website and looking. Like they were saying earlier on, oh, we can't give you any advice. You have to go and get that yourself. What I asked my colleague was, if they don't tell you how to procure, and then you go and procure somebody to tell you how to procure and it's wrong, who's responsible? You know, because their advice might be wrong as well. Quite a lot of the people that have been used on other projects don't necessarily know the detail of the ERDF. You've got to be really careful about that. They're really good on bidding on projects. They're not necessarily spot on with the ERDF or EUSIF. So, yeah, that was quite an issue.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we've had issues where the bid was written quite a bit before, and then you have a period of discussion, which I was saying. And then by the time it actually comes in, lots of things have changed. It's really important we're more and more finding, and we're certainly looking to make changes, that the bid writers are very much au fait with how you actually deliver these things and who's actually doing them. Because, as you're saying, it goes in and goes through into your bid and the contract, who will be expected to do that. However unrealistic it is when you actually try and match the two up. So our process is very much going to start looking where the bid writers are very much working with the delivery teams, whoever's going to be producing the evidence. And that's the key thing I've found. Who's going to produce this paper, what signatures, and how is that going to get back to a secure filing system that you're going to keep for the next...
Till 2025.
Exactly. You know, and it's as simple as that, how you make that
And you
happen.
have to keep everything. So, that's me in the middle. And these are all the people within the University of DCLG who have a right to tell me what to do. There's more than that. There's a lot more than that. And they're all the ones who want you to jump straight away. So I quite like this, just change the names on it. But I have all of this going on all the time. And in the end, this one's important. That's what you're supposed to be doing it for, you know? But if we look at that one person, the only one who's actually looking at the whole, what you're doing, the rest of them are all there for all the other reasons that you have your university due diligence, you have your ERDF due diligence, you have your project due diligence, you have your research, finance, everything going has a say, but none of them can override ERDF. So I think what you have to take on board is, as we've done with, as you can see from the slides, it's got the EU logo on every single one. It has not got University of Leicester on there. University of Leicester will tell me off. ERDF will fine me if it's not on there.
Why can't you have both?
Because it wouldn't have space. And it's about sizes as well. You've got to have the same size. And it just starts to get complicated because you end up with thousands of logos all over everything. So the bottom line is, if you have a choice, you put the EU one on and you lose everything else because the rest of them can only tell you off. Okay? They're not going to take your money away, whereas these guys will. ERDF regions you know about, and you also know it's been changed. We found this really weird because we were dealing with people up here just south of the Humber, one of which was 100 yards outside the East Midlands, we couldn't count them. And there's another little group that we were working with that sits in a tiny little pocket around where sort of Sheffield and what have you is in the Peak District. And they literally, their office is in this little hole, and the whole of the ERDF region goes around them. And we were just stuffed, and they were a really good company, and we did some really good work. But we couldn't count them as an output. It was useful in other ways, so it wasn't that we couldn't deal with them. Don't ever think you can't deal with people, and you can't use ERDF money to collaborate with a company. What you can't do is count them as an output. And you have to justify it. So if this company is allowing you access to something else, there's nothing wrong with you collaborating with them under ERDF. It's just not countable as an output at all. So it's about how you look at that. How many outputs do you have to do? If you've hit all your outputs in terms of SME engagement, there's nothing wrong with dealing with a few other people. But if you are severely short, you do not want to be wasting, your precious money and your resources dealing with lots of bigger entities or ones outside the region, unless there is a knock-on effect for you. We found we had sort of a consortia, some people outside and some people in. So it kind of worked on that basis. And that's really tough, because you might have a fantastic company, be able to do a brilliant bit of work with them, you just don't count for your outputs. So you're right. What it says on your contract is crucial. If you don't say it, you can't do it. If you do say it, you have to do it. And if you're too vague, you don't get a contract. So how did we get around with dealing with SMEs this is quite a niche market for GSTEP with the satellite data. So I found out very fast they don't come to you just because the University of Leicester, all these academics going, we're wonderful, they'll love to work with us. No, they don't, they hate you. You're too slow. You don't get stuff done fast enough for them. It takes you 6 months to get a collaboration agreement sorted out. So what they're going to do, they're going to give up and go somewhere else, go to TSB or find a way around it. So I went to thousands and thousands of business events. I mean, I was a sort of done networking and stuff before, because my background is a whole host of different things that probably worked really well, including sort of semi-running my own company when I lived around London, being on Sports Council, Executive Committee. So doing lots of things with local authorities, doing things independently, and then eventually teaching. Wow, that was interesting. And then went into university on the sort of business management side. Because of all of that, I can see possibilities with virtually every company I deal with in a way the academics can't. So I can, because I'm a science background as well, so you can see what they're thinking of, and you can think, I've got a civil engineering company, that could be interesting, let's get them to talk. So it's a really good way of getting people together, even if at that point it doesn't go forwards. So you do need a manager who's kind of open to lots and lots of things and potentially has quite a lot of experience in lots of different areas if they're working at a university. So I went to loads and loads of events, loads and loads of really early ones. Business breakfast at 7:30 in the morning. Let's take it, you've all been to these. They're really good, they're really short. Then you get to work afterwards and you talk to a nice little cohort of 20 people, quite committed to chatting and networking and moving on from there. Ran some of our own events, quite large but sector specific, and then slowly work it down to down the funnel to the ones that you can probably do your best engagement with. And never lose sight of all the rest of them. You never know when the next thing comes along, whether 100 of the others that maybe you can't take forward at that point might be of interest or might want to come forwards with you on your next endeavour. So one or two of the academics can be quite dismissive, but most of them are pretty good once you've got them on board. This is what you were saying, right in the contract. You have to do what it says. We put loads of stuff in that first one, and we kept having our contract manager saying, you said you'd do this, but you said you'd do 10 of those, 5 of those, you said you'd do this and this and this and this and this. The extension got pared down quite a lot. I pulled out the core that I knew we were capable of delivering, added on the 10 to 15% of outputs in the areas I knew we had no problem delivering, which is your graduate placement and your HEI collaboration. So always look to your strengths. What are you really good at, and offer them more in those areas. You need need to know what your regional programme has agreed with the EU. They may have said that for, say, the innovation part of the new programme, that for 10 million, they're going to give them 600 collaborations. And then you work out what that is in terms of cost and collaboration. And when you put your contracting, make sure yours is not dearer. So if you're only doing a tenth of that, they're going to look at all the bids coming in and decide that maybe yours is so expensive per collaboration, they're not going to hit their regional target. So you need to get quite close to the sort of cost per output figures that are there for your region, for the money you're asking for. And then look at it and think, oh my God, if I want 1 million, I've got to do 1,000 SMEs. Can I actually collaborate with 1,000 in 3 years? And you've got to be sensible about this, So have a look at whether it's deliverable at that level for what your expertise is. I was not a satellite expert or an Earth observation expert. I'm a lot better at it now. But it did take time. We had 3 years to do it. It would take time to get up to speed on that. If you can do it without ERDF, do it without ERDF. It's 50% intervention rate. If you're asking for a couple of 100,000 or more, and they were talking about 500,000 being a small amount, it's on top end. If you've got £250,000 of match to play with, do you really need ERDF to do this? Can you pare it down and do it without? The amount of administration you will be doing with ERDF, you need a full-time person doing that. So if you're only asking something like 500,000, and you're thinking, oh, I've got to do this, do that, do the other, you're tying yourself in knots with all these rules, with being paid after the event all the time. So you've got to spend it first to claim it back. It takes them up to 3 months to actually pay you back as well. So not only is it 3 months to claim it, it could take them 3 months to pay you, 6 months after you spent it. So you've got to have that kind of amount of money floating around in the first place. So be really careful on this, and if you feel with a pared down programme you can manage it without the ERDF, you're much better off, because you can do what you want then, engage with who you want and take it where you want, and charge the companies a small amount if you really think it's worth it, which you can't do with ERDF. We did loads of business breakfasts where we know those companies would not have objected to paying £10 or £15 to come and give us a little income stream for what we were delivering for them. Couldn't do that under ERDF. So we haven't built anything that's as sustainable as it could have been, because suddenly now we're going to charge. You haven't built that into it in the first place. So you haven't built in that idea that we think we're worth paying for. You've got to shove it in later. So there's a whole income stream, I think, on this. Area of intervention is wide as you can get it without losing sight of what you're trying to do. We've had this horrible problem with satellites and Earth observation, and it's only because I looked at it and thought, data's data. And the academics are going, oh, it's special data. No, it's data, it's all figures. And let's turn it around. Where is it useful to the companies, and build it up from the bottom? And they left me to it because this was not research. We got some really great research projects out of it. Budget profiles, as I was saying this morning, if you get that wrong, you're stuffed, because you've got to reprofile, and that takes some time to agree it. And with IRSA, on a short programme, 2 years, we were forced. I wasn't going to budget reprofile because I'm on target on this. That's what it says I can spend, I'll spend it. But we were forced to do it because we were all told to do it. So if you're going to do it, I made it a more sensible profile. And at the moment we're spot on, because I knew that's what I would spend. But I know how much everything costs the university, and it's easier for me there to do it. I would have a problem in another establishment getting to grips with what all their costs are. But you can still, you've got to profile it. Unless you know you can hit the ground running, you profile it fairly flat, peak it, and make sure it starts to tail off in the last 3 months. Okay, because if you don't do that, you're skewing it into the middle. You're going to be late starting. I haven't come across one yet that started bang on time. You are going to be able to build outputs at the beginning. End load them if you can, because you've given yourself breathing space. Otherwise, your contract manager's going back all the time. You said you'd do 5 of these and you've only done 1. Yes, I know, but you're late starting. Not an excuse. That's what you said you'd do.
So there was a recent thing where they were worried about the end of the calendar years, the
Yep.
equals 2 stuff.
Yeah.
That was something that here at the company I work for hadn't experienced before. They'd always said we could carry money across sort of the years. And of course then this year when
10%.
Mark was saying, sort of it all became very problematic sort of with their side of things. We were looking at one stage where people were, we were under the threat that we could lose the same percentage as we were on our profile. I'd like to say we could pull it back. But, that sort of conversations we're having, and it starts getting people very worried when your next year's is going to be reduced by 50% of what you think that most
can do.
commitments going to
That was what the reprofiling was about. but
roll back in, yeah.
You've kind of got a 10% rule on this. If you're down by 10% in overall, then they tend to feel that you're way underspent, really. And it's 50% across the programme as a whole. The other project sits in the office, me was 40%. I could have spent that money easily. They weren't doing it, so it's not my problem. But the other thing about ERDF is if you are in one big organisation, they don't see you necessarily as separate projects. They see the person who is in control, which is the University of Leicester. It's the same problem. So if they spot a problem in one of them, they'll come and probably audit you just for the sake of it to see if you're doing the same thing, which you probably are. Luckily, we sort of learned the lessons from everyone else and changed it. We're still getting audited. It's like that. So it's made a lot of extra work for us. I think I've probably covered most of this already. So you have to pay 3 months, that's that. Start off and delayed, you know that. Minimising your risks. Our big problem with this, check your SMEs and SME. Does everybody do that? And then check it again, and then check it on another site. We had a very, very good company, which we still work with, convinced they're an SME, they look like an SME, they're an SME or SME or something else. I had to look somewhere else. They're not. When I drilled into who actually owned what part of this company, it wasn't 50-50, it should be something else. So by checking, really going into it, they're not an SME. So
when is an SME not an SME then?
50% or more owned by a larger entity.
Right.
46 million euros turnover, 50 million assets, or the other way around, and more than 250 employees. Any one of those.
The other end, self-employed, single
You
person,
can use,
not registered.
you can deal with them as long as they're registered. You can prove it.
They have to be registered.
So national insurance,
That.
there's usually a bit of paper for that.
Yeah.
If they are an entity that is trading, they should have at least one trading activity in the financial year. If they don't, you can't count them. So we had one group who started up, great stuff, did something for that the first year up to the first financial period, then didn't do anything after that. So the whole year went past, they're no longer trading. Then you can't count them. There's nothing going on. So they come up as dormant. And that means you've now got an issue with that. So this ERDF expects you to check that. And if you've got hundreds of companies still dealing with, to keep doing that with every single person is why it's so admin heavy.
You count people who are like pre-enterprise, pre-startup, and who are going to become businesses or set up businesses.
So if they're a startup, you count them as a startup, as part of their project. But if they don't trade at all, they're not a startup, they're not even a business. So they have to do something that is part of their business. They have to buy something for their business that is defined as part of their business, that's declared as an activity of their business. And if they don't do that, if they just buy a computer on their credit card and say that's their business activity, it's not acceptable. So there's lots and lots of little quirky issues here. And if they do a 3-day audit on you and decide to drill that, that's all the sorts of things. They love figures. This is the sort of figures they look for. So just make sure you've covered your back by doing more outputs. So if they find a few that aren't necessarily entities anymore, you've still got enough outputs. Auditors like finding mistakes. What they don't want to do is find mistakes that you can't cover. So if you've got, like we did, supposed to do 30 SME engagements, like we had 40. So they did find 1 or 2 that had dropped into that non-trading or got too big because they've been bought up or whatever. We'd still done the outputs we said we'd do, even know we lost one or two off the approved list. So if you try not to work too close to the margin all the time, it's usually okay. But do keep checking. And any one of those companies that you feel is, you're not quite sure about, keep drilling, keep checking. Your outputs are dependent on that.
Did you have a problem getting information back from the SMEs?
Oh yeah. They won't tell you.
How did you
You
get
go to company's house and buy their accounts and check.
So you have to cost in that sort of thing as well then?
Yeah. Just don't buy them. They're not that expensive, but don't buy the short ones. If you're really worried about that company, don't buy the short account. Buy the long one, because there's all sorts of stuff hidden in there. You start going down the figures and you think, oh my God, what is this company doing? It's put, one had actually managed to squeeze something like £52 million off into something else that was all sort of hidden amongst all their accounts. They're not an SME. There's just too much going on there. The point is they're quite near the edge, so you can kind of guess the ones that are probably not quite what they think they are. Some of them genuinely don't realise that they've crept out of that SME group. They've been that size for so long, and suddenly they're now got a turnover of 51 million. And it's euros, of course, so you look at it in pounds, you've got to convert it, and the exchange rate at the moment allow for that, because you may find your 42 million euro whatever, 1.35 and all the rest of it, and it starts to be something else.
So is that the whole time that you're supporting them, so not just at the entry point?
Because I've got 12-month projects, I check them again at the end. If they're short interactions of 3 to 4 months, it's not going to matter, is it? But if it's going across to commercial periods, then you do need to check, because these are the things they will look for. You're going to be audited. They know their figures. They'll measure your logos and they'll look at your figures. That's what they do. And they do measure them. Oh God, do they measure them? This chap came in, lovely guy, best auditor I've come across. He was really nice on everything. He measured every single logo. Just got his ruler out and off he went with his logo. Didn't have the board around a lot. So they're just looking for mistakes, So we've kind of got logos on everything. Oh, done that. Yeah. If you are, I've got a £950,000 project. There's me. I have an assistant, and I now have an intern. I have an assistant and an intern, and we're delivering 16 small projects, 14 intermediate ones, and all sorts. That's me most of the time. Okay. Oh, let's work. I do that a lot. I can actually juggle. And I feel like that practically, normally after an audit or a claim, particularly after a claim. Minimising risk. I think most of this you probably know as well. Desk instructions, they actually ask you to do that, but be really prescriptive about your desk instructions for your project. If you are away, if you are ill, if for any reason you can't deal with your project as a manager for a period of time, someone else will do it for you. They won't do it the ERDF way. They'll just do it. If you have a list of everything you want done, and it's worth your while being really picky about this, that they can look for the job they've been told to do and they can do it that way. And there's no excuse for not doing every single thing the way it says you're supposed to. It makes you think really hard yourself about what do I need to do to deliver this? Which bit of paper do I need? Who needs to sign it? How many people need to sign it? Where am I going to store it? Do I scan it? Do I do this? Do I that? The other? Write it down. And then think, which bits can I lose? How can I streamline this a bit? And then eventually you get this list of instructions where if you do everything it says on that list of instructions, you're pretty covered. And so is everyone else. And they have no excuse for not doing it that way.
Right, so what if you've never done it before? How do you know what the correct process is?
You've got to sit down with a new person and explain it.
No, if I've never had the ERDF before. So
Don't
how
talk to me. Why do I do that?
Which was weird, it just was like, oh my God, they're trying to trip you up. So how would you know that you're doing the right thing?
The guidance notes. Read the guidance notes. There is a wad of guidance notes as long as your arm. The handbook that goes with all the ERDF, the USIF stuff is like, how many chapters? 22 chapters, 60 pages to a chapter, that kind of thing. You have to read it. There's lots of small print there, and they will catch you out on every single bit of it. Most of it doesn't apply, but some of it does, and you've got to search for it. And if you talk to somebody else who's done it before, they're the best ones really to say, you don't need to worry about that, you do need to worry about that. anything to do with finance, anything to do with procurement, and logos on absolutely everything. You can see them in your sleep. They go on everything. Okay? I have checklists and checklists and checklists. My intern hates this. She works off little scrappy pieces of paper and I don't know what's going on. So I actually have put her day book on the table in front of her and write it in. Because that way I know whether she's done it or not. If I don't do that, I'm responsible. I'm the business manager. If it doesn't get done that way, it's not her fault, she's an intern. Yeah? So it is your responsibility if you're the business manager to make sure it's done that way and to insist. It stops with you. Above me, it stops with the university. But for this project, it stops with me. Okay? Keep all the paperwork. If you're not sure, keep it. Sheet paper doesn't take up much space. Eventually the project does, but you can sort of compress it down, PDF it and God knows what as well. But do keep everything if you're not sure. Justification is useful as well, do keep that. Customer relation management system, if your organisation allows you to use it, then use it. University doesn't. It won't allow you to have an automatic one. So we just again have the whole write it down. Did you see that company? Write it down. How long's the meeting? Write it down. And if you want to make it easier, put tick boxes in so just fill it in easily in a spreadsheet, something like that. So come up with easier ways, but record everything. You have to record everything. Academics are dreadful. I have access to most of the academics' calendars so that I can physically put in the hours I've spent with them, and then obviously that's what we use for our timesheets. Okay, so we write them for them. You have to. They won't ERDF it apart from anything else. You can't mention students. You can't mention teaching. You can't mention specific conferences. You have to put on timesheets that they were working with your project. You have to put on it 2 hours interaction with the graduate, not student, the graduate for IRSA project. Okay, if you start writing students, they think you're teaching them. You won't pay it. So wording does make a difference. Scan everything, archive as you go along. Make sure you have a backup. Really make sure you have a backup. My intern managed to get to the end of the day and nothing had been saved. There is some auto backup going on, but there were some issues and it's all these bits of paper everywhere, so we had to resurrect that one. Yeah. End engagement reports for your collaborators. 12-month ones is really important because you have to have something that you can show to your auditors that says we did this, we did this, we did this, it's signed off. Company signed off, company's happy with it. You're happy with it, company's happy with it. Be very careful how you word it. There are IP issues if you're doing a long project. ERDF has the right to print anything that you do that they pay for. You're doing a really intricate piece of work with a company. They want to have a product at the end of that is theirs to sell. They can't if their process is now all over everywhere because ERDF thinks it's a great case study. You know? So be very careful with your collaboration agreements and your memorandums of understanding about who owns what. And be very careful with what you develop during the collaboration. You know? With us, with the longer ones, we're really careful to talk about it being a research project. We're discovering how this process is working. We're looking at how it might develop. We're investigating. We're never making it because then the idea comes in. So if you start coming into problems with that, they have to come off the ERDF funding and talk about collaborating in another way if they want to own it at the end. Right, because technically ERDF owns it. So that's a really important one for longer interactions. We've tried really hard not to be caught out on that. Oh yes, the paperwork. That's just a few files at the top I've got. A set of papers that goes with how I monitor my projects, bottom left. Some of the forms the company has to fill in, top right. My dreaded logos, so I can stick them on everything if someone's forgotten to do it. So everything then gets stuck on afterwards. We even had stress balls where the company hadn't printed the logo on like they should, and we literally stuck them on every single one. Okay? And they were fine with that because the logo was on it. And to make it bigger actually, than having it printed on. It didn't stay on as long as it should, but it did go on. So do that. Every piece of kit that's been bought by our project, We know what the serial number is, it's got a logo, it's got a label on it. Doesn't matter where it is around the university, that label's on there. When we were audited, 3-day audit, first project, G-Step 1, we'd spent £60,000 on storage, IT storage. Now the university doesn't have a little cupboard that says G-Step storage. It's a massive great facility with blades and all sorts, that's the storage facility. And we bought like 2 of these. They insisted on seeing the G-Step blades in this storage facility. So the job of one person was to nip over there fast before them stick a label on it. So when they looked at this rack, it had a label that said G-Step ERDF just on the side, so they could look at their bits of kit. So just be very aware of that. If you're not sure, stick a label on it. That's the easiest way to do it. Tell them to pay for what you might have to do. Archive everything. Oh, I like this one. That's how I feel sometimes. Some sort of late 20th century prison, put ERDF across it. Sitting in the cubicle all the time. Okay. I think the top one's probably the most important, really. I deliver everything. I can deliver everything. I can get the company in. I can actually do the collaboration. I can sign it off. If it's complex, then I get my academics in, my graduates in. If it's possible for me to do the whole thing from start to finish, that's the cheapest, easiest, quickest to do. So with G-Step, I used to run a lot of 2-day, 3-hour workshops, go through what we were doing, do some of the teaching and training of how to use the data and so on, and at the end of it you get 5 or 6 companies quite happy to sign up this 6 hours, 2 days consultancy, and that's it, you've done it. From that point onwards you then have the questions of, well, that's all very well, but what about? Now you bring your academics in for your longer projects. But if you've said you're going to interact with 100 SMEs, it's really useful if you physically can do 50 of them, or have to pull anyone else in. So again, the workshops and the delivery and the interaction, the skills that you personally have as a business manager can make the whole ERDF process a lot easier. Not only can you keep your head above the water on the admin, because you know what you've done, you can also get a lot of the outputs. And if you've got a lot of the outputs backed up, now you've got breathing space to really think about things you maybe got the money for in the first place. Yeah. So, take time to get running. Let's think about the workshops there. Procurement, if in doubt, procure it. Just get 3 quotes. It's annoying, companies hate it because you're going back to similar people in the same area all the time for repetitions of things. And in the end, someone refused to give you a quote. You just got to find someone else. If you can't get 3 quotes, you can't buy it. That's the bottom one. Audit standards at all times. Happens a lot. Oh yes, good old audits. Bad news coming. The minute I got the email saying I had an audit, 2 days after the event, it's like a nightmare. How do I prepare for that? In 3 weeks, you know, it's tough doing that. So that's how it felt. Get your ducks in a row. This is what our academics look like. It's like herding cats, they're all over the place. So pinning that lot down with just 3 weeks is really, really tough. They really are like that. They're dreadful. Trying to get them to do it in that short period of time is almost impossible. So if you can get your paperwork sorted out before you really need to, it helps. Like that one. All the same, that's nice. All adds up. I don't think I need to do a lot of detail about this. If you go into the guidance notes, it will tell you about PAVs and PEVs. Basically, you do what it says on the tin. If they tell you to do something afterwards, you do it. That's it. And if they found any irregularity, my boss was like that on the first project. You see him for dust. Okay. And this one, just because you've not heard anything from them, don't assume it's okay. We've just had something fairly major crop up, which I'd warned about 2 years ago. I was very aware, it's in the back of my head. Don't tell ERDF or DCLG. Do not ask them direct question. Do not get on the phone or the email and go, not sure about how we do timesheets. Could you just, and then they'll tell you. Now you have to do it. So be really, really careful how you phrase your questions when you're dealing with your contract manager, because once you have put that in writing, you have to do it when they answer you that way. So have that off record a conversation, and I've heard that. Perhaps we did this, that kind of thing. Get around there. They know what you're asking, but they've got too many other contracts at that point to have to give you an official formal answer. Good old logo, make sure it's got the right gap round it. If you stick it on a coloured surface and you don't put the thing on it, okay, yeah, then you've got a problem. Say, if someone decides to measure it, awful. These are all, on white backgrounds, they're fine. Okay. I still think that University of Leicester one's slightly too big. That wasn't me. Receipts for all expenses. Do you guys know all about this, about the receipts and all that? Having everything, not being able to have alcohol and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, keep receipts. They've now started asking for justification. That's all very well. It's at a conference. You went, why? A bit difficult telling an academic that who's just given his best talk of his life that may not be ERDF compliant. Okay. And closure, I mean, we're kind of into this, did it sort of G step 1. You've got to plan it. Everything drops off the end of the project. Some poor soul is left afterwards because the final claim goes in after the last payment. Places like universities and big organisations haven't really thought that through and given you an extra 3 or 6 months' wages to actually finish closing the project. So we actually have a big long list of all the things that must be done by June the 30th that some poor soul is going to look at afterwards and think, how do I do this? You know, they're going to have that problem. So do build in an extra 2 to 3 months if you can, real money at the end, because as an entity you still have to close the project. You still have to do that final claim. You still have to compile everything. And you may have found your wage ended when the ERDF ended. So you still need that done, or you need somebody who can do that. And that's a big hole, particularly for smaller projects. So inform in the future. What you write is what you have to do. And now the outputs you say you're going to do, there's a suggestion they might take money off if you don't do them. Qualities is becoming more important, because that was sort of the LIM thing in January, and that one came up. Broad a scope as you can without being so hazy, it could be anything. Okay? Administration's horrendous, but it's doable. It's routine with it. Be able to deliver all of it, so you can go from start to finish on all the engagements if you can. Yourself, personally. It's much easier than to get tipped off. Be honest with everybody. One of the business managers wasn't. So, oh, it's fine, it's no problem. And then you hit them with all this paper they have to sign. Tell them at the start, if they don't want to do it, don't even go there. Because you aren't going to get the paperwork off them, and now you've done work for them, and you've done things. So unless they're happy to sign all that paperwork and show it to them at the start and explain what all of it is, and then they go, I really don't want to sign all that, then that's fine. But don't go any further, because you haven't really got the resources or the time to deal with a lot of companies that don't fit. Okay, not unless the project's fantastic. It's all right.
67 in the morning.
Okay, 6 in the morning. They make or break it. If your team is rubbish, it will fail. You need people really committed and you really get on with as well. And if they can't second guess you some of the time, you've got a problem. Okay. Oh, this one. That's how I feel at the end of every claim. And now have one of those. You'll do a photo for it. Okay.
Yes, ineligible expenditure. Do you want food and drink for? No.